And I'm glad to introduce the Julie Sellers, Dr. Sellers, about her book. And there's an E and at the end, Anne of Green Gables. No, Anne of the Sunflower Lane. I'm kind of confused with that the screen. So that's the point of this session, and how she got an idea and then made her book published, and then eventually how to get the books to the libraries and the readers. So welcome. Thank you. So Julie.
Thank you so much. And thank you for this opportunity to be here to talk with you. I am going to put all of my social media information in the chat right now because I'll forget if I don't, and I want you to have that. So that is in the chat. I am the author of Anne of Sunflower Lane. This is my first novel, and it's a young adult novel, but as my publisher told me, I think quoting C.S. Lewis, perhaps if you write a novel or a story that only children like, then it's not a very good story. So this is a story that will appeal to people of all ages. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my inspiration, about my writing process, what I hope readers will take away, and also how I'm working to try to get the book into libraries, because libraries were very important to me when I was growing up in rural Kansas. They were my window to the world. When I was able to participate in the summer reading program at the local library in Florence, Kansas, I thought it was the greatest thing ever. And then later, when I was able to go to Marion, which was a little bit larger town, and get a library card, that was very important. And then the world really opened when my mother suggested we could drive the 30 miles to Newton and I could get a library card there. So I would definitely want to talk about that part of this process too. So what inspired me to write this book? Obviously, I am a huge fan of Anne of Green Gables. I read that novel when I was 14 years old and then devoured all of the other novels by L.M. Montgomery. And I really did identify with Anne as a young girl, and I think I still do as an adult in many ways. I was bookish, I was very studious, I was creative, I loved nature, only I didn't have the nature of an island. I had the nature of the Flint Hills of Kansas. So I grew up not very far from Emporia and in Marion County in Florence. So I felt all of those points of similarity. And I had often said, I really felt like I could write the Kansas version of Anne, and I hadn't done it. I'd had this dream of writing novels, and I had written short stories and poetry. I am a member of the Kansas Authors Club and had done well in those contests. I've published here and there creatively, and of course as an academic too. But I'd never done what I said I was going to do and write that novel. So during the pandemic, I decided this was the time, it was now or never. And in the summer of 2020, it occurred to me, I can sit and worry all summer about what school is going to look like in the fall, or I can do something. And I thought the something probably ought to be the novel. So I did my own NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, which actually is in November. It doesn't work very well for a college professor to try to write a novel in November. So I did my own in May. I decided approximately how many words per day I'd need to write to make that happen. Between May and June of 2020, I wrote the novel. But I actually began by writing in my journal, what if? And this is how this began, what if? And I tossed around some different ideas and just kind of followed those thoughts. And then I went with that idea. So what is relationship between my Anne Alwyn, and Anne of Green Gables? Well, my story is about a 15-year-old girl who is sent to live with the maternal grandparents she never knew at Sunflower Lane Farm near Story, Kansas. And this is because the courts find her father to be a neglectful parent. And at Sunflower Lane, Anne discovers that she strongly resembles the mother she never knew. And she also finds that everyone from her strict grandmother to her more understanding grandfather avoids talking about her mom, and she doesn't know why. So this is part of the conflict and the mystery throughout. Then her grandfather gives her an old edition of Anne of Green Gables, and Anne immediately identifies with the title character. So my Anne is a reader of Anne, as so many girls I know were. And what's more, both of the Annes, mine and Anne Shirley, are not just readers, but they're quixotic readers, meaning that they try to enact what they read and make it part of the reality. And of course, if you've read Anne of Green Gables or seen the miniseries or the more recent Anne with an E on Netflix, you know that the fact that she tries to make reading a reality is what gets her into trouble a lot of the time. And that happens with my Anne as well. So I would like to read several excerpts for you, and I'm going to begin with an excerpt from the second chapter. The title of this chapter is The Rules. And so we're going to see some of Anne's strict grandmother's rules. The morning breeze danced through the south window in Anne's room. It rustled the pink and white checkered curtains before slipping over the bed where she still lay reading and out the north window to the fields beyond. Sunlight glanced off the windows, reflecting Anne's current mood, for she was in considerably better spirits than the previous afternoon by pure and simple dint of a good book. Anne sucked in her breath and stared at the yellowed pages of Anne of Green Gables. Marilla Cuthbert was so aggravated at Anne Shirley's outburst at Mrs. Lynde for criticizing her red hair that she could almost hear Marilla's voice leap off the page all the way from Green Gables. Now that was some talented writing. Anne Outwin! Anne's head snapped up. She glanced at the clock. It was 7:30. Grandma told her that they lived by the philosophy of early to bed, early to rise, but surely 7:30 wasn't late. Anne left her book on the nightstand beside the white Jenny Lind bed and dashed from her room to the top of the stairs. She peered over the banister at her grandmother below. Thelma Holmberg stood, hands on her hips, an embroidered apron covering her cotton dress. "Good morning," Anne said, hoping she wasn't in trouble already. "You can't lay abed on a farm all day, Anne. Breakfast is ready and we're waiting for you." Anne caught her breath. Hadn't Marilla just said something like that in the novel? Who said fiction was stranger than truth? "Oh, I wasn't asleep. I just got caught up in the book Grandpa gave me and lost track of time." Just like Anne Shirley, she added to herself. "Well, enough of your reading for now. Put on some clothes and come down," said Grandma. "I'll be right there." After breakfast, Anne asked, "Would you like me to clear the table?" She could at least do that right. "That'd be real helpful, but first we need to talk about our expectations here," said Grandma. Anne swallowed. "Sure." "First and foremost, no boys." "What?" "There's a time and a place for everything, and you'll have plenty of time for boys later," Grandma said crisply. "Where would I even meet a boy?" said Anne. "We do have boys here in the country, and they do attend school," Grandma said. It was the first time Anne had detected so much as a spark of humor in her grandmother. "But I won't be here when school starts. Dad promised to have this resolved by then." Grandma shook her head. "Now you know that's not likely, but no buts. It doesn't matter how long you're here. I don't want you having a boyfriend." Anne's temper flared. "Oh, don't worry. I never had one before, so I can't imagine I'd have one here. Boys don't tend to like bookworms." "It's for your own good," Grandma said. "Fine. It's not like it will be a hard rule to keep," Anne said. "Next, no wandering off or going anywhere without permission." "Well, that ought to be easy. I've been going nowhere but from home to school and back my entire life, so I shouldn't think it would be difficult to stay locked in this house either." "You won't be locked in anywhere. We just want to know where you are," said Grandma. "Don't worry, I can't even drive, so you're safe." Anne's cheeks were flushed. "We also don't condone drinking or drugs." "Never have done either. Wouldn't start now," Anne said shortly. She crossed her arms and glared. Did they think she'd snuck out and chased boys all over the country and been a complete party animal? Little did they know what her life had been like. You'll have a few chores around the house. Many hands make light work, you know. And you'll go to church on Sundays, said Grandma. Oh, I don't usually go to church. You will now. And when school starts, we'll expect you to study hard and make good grades. But I won't be here when school starts, Anne said, face flushed. Grandma sighed. That is not what the judge said. He said Dad had to get a stable job, and Dad said he'd fix this by the end of summer. Anne's voice rose. Let's not argue about it, said Grandpa. We're not arguing, Grandma and Anne said in unison. The statement hung in the air for a moment. I'm not a bad kid, Grandma, I promise, Anne said. Grandma studied the frank eyes, the tilt to Anne's chin. I know it must be real hard to have your life disrupted, but this is for the best, and so are the rules. I just want to keep you safe, Grandma said. Safe from what? We're in the middle of nowhere. The sound of car doors closing out front filtered in through the open window. Grandpa looked out. Oh, no, it's the Page sisters, he said. Of course it is. No one else would come calling at this hour, and they're dying to see Anne. Please behave, Grandma cautioned. Grandma, I'm almost 16. I think I can behave, Anne said, bristling. And who are the Page sisters? Grandpa said, the two nosiest gossips in the county. And be forewarned, they're here to grill you. So that is kind of an introduction to the family dynamic that goes on through a good part of the novel, where Grandpa is kind of the more understanding and Grandma is stricter, and Anne doesn't always understand the rules and doesn't always understand her place. I should also mention that the background I have up is the cover of the novel, and it was drawn by Madison, Kansas artist Annalie Nicklin. So I was very pleased with the way that she took my image and my imagination of Anne and Sunflower Lane, the home and the actual lane with the sunflowers, and made those come to life. So all of this revolves around this home and this relationship and the relationships that Anne develops with other people in that small Kansas community of Story, Kansas. So I'd like to talk a bit about the writing process with you. As I said, I began by getting out my journal and saying, what if? And the what if didn't go the way the book ended up entirely. It was, what if a young girl, what? I wasn't sure. I didn't think in my entire childhood was necessarily grist for the mill for writing this novel. So I knew I was going to have to get creative with it. But I thought the sensibilities that I had, my respect and love of the Kansas landscape, could definitely be a part of it. And my grandparents were a big part of my life, and I did integrate some things that were common to their characteristics and characters. For example, my grandmother never met an old-fashioned saying she didn't like to repeat. So, for example, in what I just read, Grandma says, many hands make light work. That was Grandma's code for, we're all going to go out and garden now, or we're all going to bake, or we're all going to help out with the chores. So I did draw some on my own experiences, but I had a lot of fun just creating and making up scenes and putting Anne in trouble so that she had to get out of it. So I had the basic situation. I got that by writing in my journal, writing the what if, and then I began to brainstorm some different scenes and ideas. And I wrote that first month in 2020. I revised then. I sent it out to beta readers. This is a very important step in the writing process because they'll catch things to improve your ideas. They'll catch the logical flaws sometimes when you think, oops, I knew what I meant, but that's not clear. And it's a very enriching experience. So I revised some then, and then school started. It was the pandemic year, 2020, 2021, and I am a college professor, so I didn't do much with it. The next summer, I revised pretty heavily because I had, by that time, gone to an online virtual talk done by Lisa Cron, and I cannot recommend her enough, especially her book, Story Genius. And she talks about writing, not necessarily to an outline or not to any sort of architecture. So there are lots of theories out there about how you should write a novel. She writes to striking what she calls the third rail, to really making that connection where the reader emotionally reacts and wants to turn the page and feels the need to turn the page. And I'm pretty sure as readers, we've all had that book where we think, I'm just going to read a chapter and then it's 2 a.m. and we can't put the book down because we just keep turning the page. Well, that's what Lisa Cron gets at. And she talks about looking at the plot and finding the cause. What happens? What's the effect of that? And even beyond thinking of that as an effect, what are the consequences? So I talked about putting Anne in trouble. What are the consequences? What happens? And then the third rail is why it matters. What is going to strike that sense of identification, or that, oh, I don't like that. Oh, I feel terrible for that person. Some emotional reaction, why it matters. And then the realization. And so is what happens next and makes you want to turn the page. So when I revised, I kept all of that in mind. And I had a lot of fun going back and really trying to draw those threads out more and really work those themes and those feelings into the plot so that my readers would want to continue turning the page. So for my second reading, this is a little bit farther along in the novel. It's called Anne's Imagination Goes Wrong, the chapter title. And it is a reference to Anne of Green Gables. There is a scene where Anne Shirley and her friend Diana think up ghosts for the wood that is between Green Gables and Orchard Slope, where Diana lives. And then Anne's guardian, Marilla, wants her to go through the woods when it's dark to borrow a pattern from Diana's mother. And Anne believes what she imagined. So her imagination went wrong. In this story, Anne and her friends, she's made some new friends, are having a slumber party. And Anne's new best friend is named Corrie Addair. Corrie has an older brother, Cameron, who's your typical teenage boy. And so this is a scene at a slumber party, and they decide they're going to tell ghost stories. So this is from the chapter, Anne's Imagination Goes Wrong. And I think this is interesting because with that older brother, we also start to see a little bit of conflict around Grandma's rules. Do you think it's going to rain? Anne asked Corrie as they frosted cupcakes and awaited the arrival of the other girls. Maybe, but a little thunder and lightning would add to the ghost stories. Ghost stories, huh? That sounds lame. Cameron smirked and swiped a cupcake before they could protest. We take our literary efforts very seriously, Corrie said. Yeah, well, just because you do doesn't mean anyone else does, Cameron said. He leaned against the refrigerator with the practiced nonchalance of an adolescent boy. Anne glared. Cameron Addair was truly aggravating. I'll have you know, Mr. Addair, she said, making purposeful use of italics, that I shall welcome the feedback of any qualified individual. However, I regret to inform you that you are far from qualified to comment on the merits of anything I write. Anne's italics were not lost on Cameron, although they only seemed to amuse him, much to her dismay. Oh, really? Anything you write? He asked. Anything, not even a grocery list. Ouch, said Corrie. Chill, I was just teasing. Cameron helped himself to another cupcake and left. In short time, the other girls had arrived, and they gathered around the table, enjoying pizza and ice cream as they chatted nonstop. Then they adjourned to the basement to watch a romantic comedy on Corrie's VCR. As they laughed together, Anne realized she'd never had this many people she could consider friends before. Time for the ghost stories, Jenny said when the movie was over. I'll go first. She switched off the lights and flicked on a flashlight, shining it on her face as she regaled them with a story featuring more blood and gore than Anne was prone to like. She regretted having read the copy of In Cold Blood she discovered among her mother's books earlier that week. After the others had told their stories, it was Anne's turn. She had opened her mouth to begin when Molly asked, Did you hear something? No, scaredy cat, said Jenny. I think it was just thunder, said Laura. Anne turned the flashlight on her face and looked around at her expectant audience. Valancy lived in an old farmhouse in the Flint Hills, Anne said. A clap of thunder sounded, dull and distant. See, Molly, we told you it was just thunder, Jenny said. Anne continued. Valency's family had lived in the house for generations, and family legend told that her great-great-grandfather hid a chest full of gold somewhere on the land, but no one ever found it. Then, one summer, a terrible drought struck the land. Oh no, said Laura. Droughts are bad news on a farm. Crops withered in the field, and wide cracks split open the parched earth like so many canyons. Nice line, Jenny complimented her. Did you hear that? Asked Molly. It's just the rain. Go on, said Corrie. Valency's father had made some ill-informed business decisions, and the farm was in danger of failing. Many a night, Valency sat by her open window, wishing she could find the long-lost treasure. Then, one stormy night, Valency was awakened by a strange noise. She rose from her bed and crept quietly downstairs. Don't go, Valency, whispered Molly. Has this girl never watched a horror movie? Asked Jenny. Once on the ground floor, she realized the sound was coming from the cave. Oh, I don't like caves, said Molly with a shiver. Valency slipped to the cave door where a weird blue light shone up the steps. Slowly she descended, drawn as if against her will. It was pitch dark, but at the bottom, something white and silvery and altogether spectral glowed. Awesome description, said Corrie. Valency recognized the ghostly face of her great-great-grandfather. He extended an icy hand, grasped her by the elbow, and led her to the far end of the cave where he pointed a bony finger at the wall. She reached down a shaky hand and pressed the wall firmly. A sound of rock on rock shattered the silence as it moved. There, inside, was a great wooden box, the lost treasure chest, filled to overflowing with gold. Whew! I thought there might be a snake down there. You never can tell with caves, said Laura. And so Valency saved the farm, although some of her relatives never believed a ghost led her to the treasure that dark night. Nice, said Corrie. She led the others in a round of applause. Okay, let's talk about boys, Jenny said. Anne sighed. I'm going to go get some water. She climbed the dark steps to the kitchen where she could hear the storm clearly. As she filled her glass at the sink, she thought for the first time that she heard something creak nearby. She shut off the faucet and listened. Who? Whispered a voice in her ear as a crack of lightning split the night and a peal of thunder shook the dishes in the cabinets. Anne spun around, the water from her glass sloshing out on her ghostly attacker. When the white blob in front of her didn't dissolve, Anne realized whoever was with her was human. Frantic, Anne tried to sidestep the intruder. If it wasn't a ghost, then someone must have chosen that very night to break into the Alexander home to kill them all, just like in cold blood. I enjoy that scene quite a bit because it shows Anne both as a reader and a writer. And we see the impact that literature can have on our imagination, and as it definitely has on Anne when she thinks that what is happening or what she read about in her book is happening in her real life. So I want to talk a little bit about working with libraries. And this is interesting because I actually just had a conversation with the director of the Atchison Public Library yesterday, and we were throwing around ideas about different kinds of talks. And she told me something that I was probably pretty aware of before I asked her. Book talks can be a hard sell at a library. If it's a huge name, if you got J.K. Rowling, you might not have a hard time bringing a crowd in. It can be a hard sell. You will probably get a lot of your friends, and even they might not be able to make it given the night or the timing, the day you have it. So what I suggested, and what I am going to continue to work with libraries to do, is more of a workshop. There are a lot of people in communities who write, whether it's memoirs, poetry, an article for the local paper, and they want to be better writers. And this was reiterated to me just last month at the Kansas Authors Club convention. I love the Kansas Authors Club. I think it's a great organization. And you're surrounded by all of these wonderful people who are fantastic writers, and yet we're all there because we think we can learn something more. We know we can learn something more. And so what I want to work with is this idea of a writing workshop and sharing excerpts from my novel, from my book of poetry, from my academic books, because all of this is who I am as a writer. And I think all of that did come into play in writing this story. I've had several people tell me that when they read the novel, it was like they were listening to me talk, especially if they knew me. It was like listening to me talk. And I think a large part of the storyteller that I am is thanks to my grandfather. He was quite the storyteller himself. He was a milkman and delivered milk around in an old Model T for years. And he knew everyone as a result. And so he could tell these stories. And so listening to him, I learned the pacing, the voice, what made an interesting story, what would bring an audience in. And as an academic, I have done a lot of qualitative research. So listening to people speak when I did this and trying to capture that when I was relaying that information back in my work was very important to me. So I think when I bring all of these different skills in, that will help me share my book and my writing and publishing, how to get published with libraries. So I would say in working with authors as librarians, see what makes them unique. See what they can do that will bring in a larger crowd. If they are willing to do a writing workshop, I think that would be a really great way to help the community come. You might have to get more than one together, or one or two authors together if they aren't interested in doing the workshop approach. But that can be a really important way to bring in people to listen and get them interested in the author's book, and also for the author to share those skills that they have. Also, I've been telling my friends wherever they are, if you request a book from the library, they will get it. So if you say, hey, there's this book I'd like you to order, they usually will be able to get it. So I'm encouraging them to reach out, especially people who think that, it can be an expense to buy a book, or who think others in the community might enjoy reading it. So let's get the book for the library. Obviously, I have high hopes that Anne of Sunflower Lane will win some awards, and that would help place it in libraries. And I will continue to work with librarians if that's the case to let this information be known. I also would say when an author approaches you, ask them for their media kit. They might not have one. That was something I learned with my first book, that I had to put together a media kit, but that has been incredibly helpful because it includes a press release, it includes information and prices about the book, the ISBNs, it includes an excerpt and discussion questions. So that can be another useful tool. And if the book itself includes discussion questions or other activities related to book clubs, if your local library has a book club, for example, ours has one, you might then be able to bring that author in, have the book club read the book, and then bring the author in to talk to the club. So I think there are a lot of ways that authors and libraries can collaborate. And that's definitely how I see it. What is good for the library? What is something I could bring? What is a service I could bring to them? And of course, that ultimately helps me because people learn more about my book. So what do I hope readers will take away from reading Anne of Sunflower Lane? Some of the major themes, as you've picked up on probably, are home, belonging, family, friendship. So my greatest hope for readers of my novel is that they will feel they've come home, that they've found a friend, that they found another family when they spend time with Anne at Sunflower Lane. For my last reading, I am going to read from a little bit later in the book. And this is a part where Anne and her friend Corrie have been convinced, maybe roped into is the word, to do a skit or something for the local talent show that is a fundraiser for the Historical Society. And they decide to act out a scene from Anne of Green Gables because they both love the novel. And this is the scene from Anne of Green Gables where Anne accidentally gives her friend Diana wine instead of raspberry cordial, and Diana gets completely drunk. And so as they start to work on this skit, they realize they need one more character. They need somebody a little older to play Marilla, who is Anne Shirley's guardian. And what seems completely out of character at that time, Anne's grandmother volunteers. And they can't believe it because she's the strict one. She's the serious one. But she volunteers to do this part. And we see I think one of the reasons I like this scene so much is we see her having fun and we see her and Anne sharing something special. So in Anne of Green Gables, the title of the chapter is Diana is invited to tea with tragic results. And in Anne of Sunflower Lane, the title is Tea with Tragic Results. The park was packed on the evening of the first ever Story Community Talent Show. Anne surveyed the large crowd seated in lawn chairs fanning out from the gazebo that would serve as their stage. They were up next. That's a lot of people. I hope they like our skit, she said. Well, the Mrs. Page ought to be happy. Their fundraiser looks like it was a big success, said Corrie. It's our turn, girls. Break a leg, said Grandma. They set up their props and the show began. Grandma, as Marilla, called for Anne as Anne, and she came running, all nerves disappearing as she delivered her first lines. There in the shade of the gazebo, with birds twittering in the branches around them and the sweet gurgling of the fountain nearby, Anne Alwyn felt even more in touch with her inner Anne Shirley. The scene progressed beautifully, with Corrie as Diana, moaning about being sick. She was clearly intoxicated, and the audience chuckled appreciatively. Anne, fed by their energy, turned quickly on the smooth cement of the gazebo's floor to race back to Corrie with her hat and parasol. And that was when disaster struck. Anne slipped and fell onto one knee with a thud she was sure must have ricocheted off the gazebo walls and across the entire park. Pain shot across her knee, but she sprang to her feet and kept going. A quick glance at Corrie revealed her friend's act was so good she hadn't even noticed. But Grandma, waiting in the wings, had a worried hand over her mouth. They finished the skit without further incident, and when it was over, Grandma hurried Anne to a bench to survey the damage. "Are you all right?" she asked. Anne raised the hem of her dress to reveal a substantial floor burn on her knee. "Oh no," said Corrie. "How'd that happen?" "I fell, and it throbs so hard I can feel every single heartbeat." "Oh, you're not bleeding. Oh dear, do you want to go home?" asked Grandma. "I'll live. I'm just embarrassed. I'm sorry I made a mess of this for you two." "A mess? Why, that's the most fun I've had in years, and it's all thanks to you. I'm so glad you let me be part of it," said Grandma. Anne smiled, despite the pain. "Me too." "If you're sure you're okay, I'll go sit with Grandpa." Anne nodded. "Go ahead." "I'll go get you a glass of lemonade," said Corrie. Anne sat glumly, looking at the oozing mess that was her knee and torn nylons, thinking that she would surely feel better if she could cry now. The tears she had bravely choked back during the skit refused to come, and she felt a sickening knot in her stomach. "Ugh, that looks nasty," Cameron said. He sat beside her. "Yeah, it really hurts," said Anne. "Take it that wasn't part of the original script?" Anne shook her head. "No, I just slipped and made a fool of myself." "Chill, no one even realized it wasn't planned." "I finally get the chance to play Anne Shirley and I mess it up. Why can't I ever get anything right?" The tears welled up at last in the wide blue eyes she turned to Cameron. "What do you mean?" he asked, elbowing her chummily. "Why, if slipping and falling during the middle of a performance isn't something your Anne Shirley would do, I don't know what is. I mean, not that I'm an expert, but you and Corrie have tortured me with and this and that forever. In fact, I think something like that should have been in the book. Why that author didn't think of it is beyond me." "And here's your lemonade. They're getting ready to announce the winners," said Corrie. Corrie stood beside the bench, and they listened expectantly as Miss Genevieve announced the third and second places. She adjusted her glasses before continuing. "And first place goes to the wonderful intergenerational skit, Tea with Tragic Results." "We won!" Corrie jumped up and down beside her. "Come on, Anne." Cameron stood and offered Anne a hand to help her to her feet. "Your fans await," he said. "Thank you," Anne replied as she arranged her dress over the remains of her nylons and the ugliness of her knee. Then, shoulder back and chin up, she walked without wincing to the stage. and Cameron stood watching beside the bench. Thank you again for this wonderful opportunity, and I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, I have a question. I'm not writing a book, but how do you find a publisher?
Excellent question. My publisher is Meadowlark Press out of Emporia.
I know them. Yay.
They are fantastic. And when I first started writing, I wasn't sure what I would do because I thought, well, I need to write it first and then think about that. There are a lot of ways to go about it. One way you can go about it is to see books that are similar to yours. There's the writer's market. Social media is full of different presses that come up. I knew Meadowlark, and I knew Meadowlark because of being in the Kansas Authors Club, and I know Tracy Million Simmons. And she was a beta reader for me. And at the time I thought, well, Meadowlark would be an option. And it wasn't until I actually had done my revisions and really drew out that thread of home that I thought Meadowlark has to be my publisher, because their tag is nothing feels better than home. And that is what this novel is about. I did really like the idea of keeping it in Kansas with a Kansas publisher, keeping it in the Flint Hills, because that is always going to be what's home to me. And so I looked, they were not open for fiction submissions until January of 2022. So I sat on it because I wanted it so badly to be with Meadowlark. If it wasn't, I would have tried somewhere else. I was very determined I was going to get it published. And fortunately, they were interested and been fantastic to work with. So in the olden days, people used to get the Writer's Market, which was a big, thick book, and you'd page through it. I think that might be available online now, but simple Google searches will start to show you different publishers. And like I said, if you find a book you particularly like, look into that publisher, and that can be a really good way to find someone that probably shares your vision.
By the way, Kathy is our academic advisor. And then I believe Kathy is still reviewer of notable books, Kansas notable books, right? Not anymore?
Not this year. So 2 years, you can only do it 2 years in a row, and then you have to go off for it. But I was a Kansas Notable Book Award reader, which is lots of fun.
Oh, yes.
But I'm now, don't you have some essays in the 105 reader?
Yes. In fact, it's sitting right here.
I thought your name was familiar.
Yes. The one in here is I do write about things other than Anne of Green Gables, but last year on my birthday, I made a cake and forgot the flour. I didn't think it was real. I didn't think anybody could really do it until I did it. And so this particular issue is on food, and that was what my essay was about.
That's good. Well, I thought I recognized your name.
Yes.
And Dr. Dow?
So hi, Julie. I teach at SLIM, and I just mainly wanted to just say what a pleasure this was today, and what a treat it was to have to be able to stop work and just listen to you. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I am a longtime lover of Anne of Green Gables, and so was our daughter. And so it's exciting to read your Kansas take on that. And I've thought of a couple of things that you made me think about when you talked about having author visits. I think that, for a long time, they were really popular, and lots of authors were coming to schools for a kind of a special event that was really publicized and kids came to look forward to. And I always thought that was really cool because librarians and teachers did, as you said, try really hard to get kids to think respectfully and to really look up to the person who is the author. And so here was this real author going to talk to them. The thing that it occurred to me was that there wasn't enough of there was too big of a gap between the students and the author. And the kids didn't know exactly what to do with that. And I think that still is a danger. But given the amount of input that young children have these days from viewing their own iPads and a lot of educational, little programs, our kindergarten grandson calls those programs. They have a way of finding their own creativity, I think, even sooner than ever, because it's shown to them. And a year or so ago, we had Bob Shea, Bob Shea, the author of children's books. He was at KLA. And when he did his presentation, up on the big screen, he was drawing the whole time. And so he's consciously following that line of thinking that if I show students this as they listen to me talk, they'll be learning as much from what they see as from what they hear. And I think you're onto a really good idea to talk to librarians about how to make those visits really meaningful and still continue that work of drawing, of learning to tell your story. And that brings me to the last point. I'm going to be still, but it's the telling the story and liking to listen to the author's voice. And kids can learn to do that at a very young age. And they just need someone to be the model for it and to encourage them to do it. And you do that so well. I think that children, really young children, can even learn that from you, and get the idea that is part of telling a story. And so in 2 clicks, I've ordered my book and it'll be on the front porch tomorrow.
Yay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I think you make a good point that authors are going to have to discover what is in their wheelhouse. I can't draw. You definitely don't want me to try to draw and do a presentation. But as a college professor and as a college Spanish professor, I'm used to trying to get people to understand me when they don't know half of the words of what I'm saying in Spanish 1. And so I think that is always something I've realized is a strength for me. And so when I was talking with our library director, I said, this is my strength. I'm a pretty decent presenter from 12 years of 4-H and forensics and being a teacher. So let me teach. And I would feel confident doing this type of writing workshop for people. And I'm used to working with adult learners. And I could also do it with children because I have a 6-year-old niece I'm already trying to indoctrinate with Anne of Green Gables. And I think if you have an author librarian who comes to you and says, well, I don't know what else I could do, find out who they are and help them discover what that is, in addition to being a writer, and they would have a great little gig that they could take to different libraries.
For sure. That's such a good idea. And I think you ought to really run with it. I thought you made me think of something else. I can't think now what it was, but it's just so exciting. I live just south of Madison from where your illustrator is. And I know where I missed the very first part of Dean Jung's introduction. Where do you teach?
I teach at Benedictine College in Atchison. So when I need my Flint Hills fix, we have to drive west of Topeka or drive down to the Emporia area.
Yeah, that's right. You're a little out of the Flint Hills.
Yeah, it's
there.
the glacial hills. It's pretty, but sometimes I can't breathe. I just need a little bit more space.
Yeah. And so maybe you'll help us to have a place like Prince Edward Island is to the Legend of Green Gables.
That would be lovely.
Yeah. Good luck.
Thank you.
I love your artwork.
Thank you. Oh, she did such a wonderful job.
Very nice.
Yeah, so I met Julie probably, I don't know, 3 weeks ago. So at this library's small gathering of authors, and then she wonderfully, as Dr. Dow mentioned, the storytelling. I was so impressed with storytelling part. But it's see, so my sense and was not the unique. So you have great storytelling capacity along with professor in Spanish. I mean, so does it have any influence or even the other side, like impediment in your writing a novel?
To know Spanish or the storytelling?
Or Spanish and then teaching Spanish.
So sometimes I forget words in English. It's not super common. I've also trained as a court interpreter. I'm a federally certified court interpreter. And when you do that kind of training so you can simultaneously interpret, there's actually less language interference. There have been some studies that of fMRIs of the brains of interpreters that show that one language will migrate to the opposite hemisphere so that they're not in conflict. So now and then it is. Sometimes I get frustrated because there might be a one word in Spanish for something that is a phrase in English, and then I get a little frustrated. And the storytelling, I don't think it's ever hindered me in any way, that whole nature of storytelling, because I tend to read what I write out loud, because that's where I catch if the pacing isn't right, or if I have a tendency towards long sentences, and that is a carryover from writing in Spanish. If I start running out of air, I know my sentence is too long. I catch typos that way. That whole oral aspect has been, I think, incredibly helpful to me. And just the storytelling, again, when I read that Lisa Cron book, I thought what she's really doing is saying, how do you string your storytellers along and leave them hanging right on the edge of a cliff? And so it just made me a little bit more cognizant of what I had heard my grandfather and other good rural storytellers do my entire life.
Any other questions from the audience? And I shared this link, the YouTube link. It is Japanese animation of the Anne of the Green Gables. It's quite different, I have to say. And the title is actually changed. It's actually Red Hair Anne.
Yep.
So we adopted, I mean, Koreans adopted, and the dubbing is in Korean. So I don't know how you view this modification, paratextual changes. So
that is actually really interesting, because there was a translator in Japan during World War II who decided to translate Anne of Green Gables. And she had been, as a child, she had gone to school with Canadian missionaries, and they gave her the book. And she had had it all these years, and she had been a very successful translator and done a lot of different translations. But during World War II, when it was actually illegal, did the translation. And just, I think a year or two ago, the English translation of her biography, which was written by her granddaughter, was released. And it was every bit as fascinating to read as the Ellen Montgomery books, Anne of Green Gables and all the others. And I think one of the things, it gave me this little thrill and this kind of goosebumps, because here was someone, again, I've met people, kindred spirits, all around the world who've had these experiences with Anne of Green Gables, men and women alike, who say, I connected with her because of X. And here's somebody on the other side of the world who speaks a different language, who has a different culture, who had that same point of commonality. And through some of my other work and research, I've been able to meet different Japanese scholars working in children's literature in Anne of Green Gables. And I have kindred spirits in Japan and Tokyo. And I think to me, that's just wonderful. I have friends all around the world that I know because of Anne of Green Gables. So I think it's fantastic.
Great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.